Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk, and today we're going to be doing another multi-part series. So this pencil sharpener here has decided to not work anymore, and my wife is going to throw it away. I was like, no, I think I'll use that as one of those multi-part series for my live stream. So we're going to work on part of this today. We're not going to do the whole thing. It'll be a multi-part series. I don't know how many parts it's going to be. I just started working on it. So we'll see. It'll probably be, 5 or 6 parts. And there's probably about 10 components inside this thing. So I have Angelo helping me out on the keyboard. So thanks, Angelo, for doing that. And let's dive right in. So what we're going to be doing today, again, as you can see, just basic starting. I don't have all the inside parts or anything like that. So we're going to be focusing on one of these bottom parts here. In the video, I have linked my outline. I've also linked a couple drawings. And the first drawing is kind of the starting shape. We're actually gonna draw the whole thing and then break it down into sub-components and then work on those individual components. So this kind of gives the overall dimensions of the pencil sharpener. And then the next one is this part here, and this is what we're going to be working on today. Again, the methods I'm showing, I'm not saying that this is the way you have to design this. It's just I'm trying to teach some tips and tricks, maybe some different methods, maybe having you think outside the box a little bit. And I like doing real things that you can actually hold and see and all that kind of stuff, because I think it helps bring out the how would somebody actually design and make this model? Okay, so let's get into Fusion. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a new session here, and then I'm going to save. And I've mentioned this before. You want to save as soon as you can. That way the autosave kicks in and basically is auto-saving for you. So we'll just call this Pencil Sharpener Assembly or something like that. So I'm just gonna give it a name, and now you'll notice it no longer says Untitled, and my autosave is gonna kick in because it knows that it can save to this particular file. So that's a good tip to do if you don't do it already. And we're gonna start by creating the basic overall shape of this, and I'm gonna do that kind of on the front plane. We'll start by, I like to draw the overall height. So again, according to the drawing, I'm not going to switch back and forth too much, but it's 6.5 inches tall in this case. And then what I want to do is I want to create some geometry that's going to help me define the nice shape of the curve of the product. And I'm going to use a 3-point spline, but instead of just randomly clicking some points, I'm actually going to use some construction geometry and real geometry to help me with that design. So again, I took some measurements of the actual product, and so I'm just going to quickly draw these lines. I'm actually going to draw them out here in space somewhere. It really doesn't matter where right now. So this one's going to be 3.5. And then for those of you that don't know this trick, if you just right click and drag straight up, it's going to repeat your last command. So you can see right here it says repeat line. So all I'm doing is just right clicking and dragging straight up, and it's going to repeat my last command that I did, whether it was a fillet or an extrude or a circle, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I've got these 3 lines kind of floating out here in space. I'm going to use the midpoint constraint. I'm going to say I want that line to be, the middle of that line to be at that point right there. And you can see how it jumped over here and it's perfectly lined up. Same thing with this guy. I'm going to click on that line and that point, and we can see that those 2 lines are perfectly lined up in the center on those points. Now, with this guy here, if I came in here and said midpoint, clicked on that line, and then clicked on this line here, it did exactly what I told it to. It put the middle of that line at the middle of that point. But now I can't move the line up or down. And I want to be able to adjust that, okay? So here's a trick that I like to do. I'm going to get it sort of close, but not perfect. And then I'm going to draw a line from the top. And you'll notice as I hover over this line, it wants to be coincident with that line, but if I get near the middle, you can kind of see it sort of snap, and that little triangle appears. And I'm going to go ahead and click right there. And what that did is it created a line that's exactly in the middle of this line. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and change, in fact, I'll change both of these lines. I'm going to change them to construction lines, construction geometry, because I don't want them to be part of my profile. Now, all I have to do is say, I want this line to be vertical, and watch what happens to this line when I do that. It kind of slides over, and because that little construction line is now perfectly straight up and down, and it was caught in the middle of this line has to be in the middle. But I have the flexibility to move it up or down. So again, real quick tip there, I just drew a line to the center and then forced this line to be vertical. Okay, so now I can throw a dimension on here. So I'll say from this point here, I want that to be 1.825. And again, this is coming off of the drawing. So you can see here's that little center line right here of 1.825. So we did this line here, and this line right here that was 3.5 in length. And then I just positioned where I wanted that to be. Okay. So now I have some key points that I can come in and do a spline. So I'm going to click on the fit point spline. I'll start there. Then I'll click on this point. You'll notice it's snapping to that point. It's making my spline go tangential through that point, and then I'm going to end at that point there and say OK. And you'll see that we now have the basic shape, or half of the shape, of the whole pencil sharpener assembly. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and say finish. And we're going to use the revolve command. So under the create menu, revolve. It allows you to take a profile and revolve it around an axis. So you can see it already selected the profile. What's the axis? I'll just click on this middle line right here, and you can see that it's going to revolve it all the way around, or 360 degrees. You could tell it go 45 degrees, go 180 degrees, it doesn't matter. In this case, we want it to obviously go all the way around. And I'll say OK. And so here's our basic shape. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and expand open my bodies. You can see we just have one body right now. Okay. Now I want to start breaking it up into its subcomponents, the base, the middle, and what I'm calling the basket, that holds all of the pencil shavings. So I'm going to create another sketch on my front plane. And I need to grab the information from this body, so I'm going to hit P for project. Now by default, project comes up as these specified entities, and let me show you what happens when I project this. I'm going to go ahead and click, say OK, and then I'm going to turn off that body, and you'll notice it only did like half of it. So project, basically it's projecting edges, and if you take a look at the body, let me turn off my sketch, you'll notice that there's an edge on that side, but there's not on this side. So Fusion basically just projected that edge, and then of course it projected the top edge and the bottom edge also. Okay, well, I want the whole thing, so I'm going to say P for project, and instead of specified entities, I'm going to say I want to project the body. And watch what happens when I do this. I'll go ahead and make sure the sketches are turned on. I'm going to undo so we don't have that sketch real quick. There we go. Okay. P for project, body. I'll make sure this guy's turned on. Why is it not clicking? Okay, let me start over, guys. I apologize. Let me move forward here. Okay, there we go. Create a new sketch. P for project. I'm going to say body, and it's not letting me select it. This is really weird. Oh, I know why. Okay, Brad stumbles. How does he solve it? Okay, I'm clicking on the body and nothing is happening. And I thought, okay, maybe it was a sketch was turned off or whatever. Well, it's asking for me to select something. So I'm going to go up to my select menu. I'm going to go to my selection filters, and you'll notice that nothing is checked except for select through, but it's not selecting bodies or select all. If I change that, okay, now you'll notice it's recognizing this. And this is because of a downstream thing that I did earlier where I was turning selection priorities on and off. And so basically it was looking for me to select an edge instead of a body, for example. So now I can say bodies, I'll click on that body, I'll say OK, and you can already kind of see the result that it actually projected the whole body. So it's almost like shining a flashlight and projecting like the shadow of it or the silhouette of it. So now I have the whole thing projected. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that goes up through the center of that. In fact, I don't really need to see the body in this case, so I'm going to turn the body off over here. And then what I want to do is I want to create, you can kind of see if I hold this up, it's got kind of this cool little swoopy down sort of gray part right here in the middle. And so we're going to simulate that with some splines. But once again, I don't want to just click and hope my splines look good. I want them to be very precise. So I'm going to create some points. Okay, and I'm just going to randomly click, but what I do want to do is make sure I'm near this edge, and you can see how it turns to a little X. That means it's catching onto that edge with the coincident constraint. So I'm just going to go ahead and click there. Maybe I'll click there. I'll click over here, somewhere over here, and I'm purposely kind of spreading them out, making sure they're not even. And then I'm going to click 2 points there. Okay. Now I want these guys to be at the same level, so I'm going to say horizontal, vertical, and you'll see they both kind of are at the same level now. Same thing with those guys there. Now if I move one of them, they move on both sides, so you can kind of see that. Okay. Then I can come in and start dimensioning these. So let's throw a dimension from here to here. And again, according to the drawing, that's 2.75. And you'll see how those points are staying on that line because they're coincident with it. And because they're horizontal with each other, they stay in line also. So let's do these two guys, and they are at 3.2. You can see how those drop down. And then this bottom point here in the middle, that's going to be at 1.95. And then this point here is actually at 2.75, which I already have. So I could come in and say, I want this point to be horizontal with that point there. Okay? Or I could have dimensioned it again at 2.75. Either way works. Now I'll go ahead and create a spline. So I'll do this top point, this middle point, and that point there. And then I'll hit the green checkbox. I'm still in my spline command, so I can come back and do the other 3 points, like so. I'll hit the checkbox. And now you can see we've got this nice curve, or these two nice curves that go through the body, okay, onto our sketch. Okay, let's finish. Now, notice we only have one body right now. I'm going to use these lines to help break this assembly into, in fact, let me show this. I should take this apart so you can kind of see what we're doing here. So you can kind of see there's this shape here, and there's this shape here, and this is actually a separate piece that we're going to make today. And then that leaves this whole base. And I'll go ahead and hopefully take apart this base real quick. And you can see inside all the stuff. And so these are all the parts we're going to be creating in future live streams. Like we'll do the cutters, this gray plastic part, you know, the whole housing, the motor. Looks like there's some electronics in there. And then this is the part we're actually creating today. So let me jump back. Okay, now I got this thing all taken apart. So we're going to use those lines to split this into those 3 different bodies. So I'm going to come in here and say split body. What's the body to split? That guy there. What's my splitting tools? And you'll notice it says tool and then it has apostrophe S. That means you can actually select more than one. So this is singular. What's the body to split? But this is plural, so it allows you to extend those or pick multiple ones. So I'm going to select that edge there, and I'm going to select that edge there. And you can kind of see it's giving me a little bit of a preview of what it's doing. It's going to take those profiles and use them to split this body. Now you'll notice we have this extend splitting tools. I like to turn it on because it actually extends past the model. And you know, you've seen me do this on previous live streams. I like to kind of over exaggerate things to make sure I'm physically cutting everything away. I kind of do the same thing here with the extend splitting tools. To me, I know that it's going to cut all the way through my model, whereas here it might and it might not. Who knows, right? So I'm going to extend that and say okay, and now you'll notice that we have body 1, body 2, and body 3. And we have that kind of that cool band that's going all the way around. Okay. Now that we have 3 separate bodies, and you'll notice they're not in any particular order. That's the bottom, that's the top, and that's the middle, right? So it makes sense for us to name these. So I'm going to name this one base. Okay. We'll name this one mid. And I'll call this one basket. I couldn't think of a better word for a name for the top part there, which we'll get to in a future live stream. So now I know which one's the base, which one's the mid, and which one's the top or the basket. Okay. So we started with just creating an overall shape, okay, of the whole pencil sharpener. And then we've split this into 3 separate bodies. Well, I want to start working on each of these as an individual thing or as an individual component, right? I want it to track all of my, you know, fillets and extrudes and sweeps and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to convert these bodies into components. And watch what happens. So I'm going to right mouse click. I'm going to say create components from bodies. And when I do that, I now have these components. Okay? And for example, I could activate the base component. Notice my timeline. Nothing has happened yet. We haven't done any fillets or shells or anything like that. But anything I do to this part now is going to get tracked because it's in that particular component. And I think this is a really good way to help manage your timelines and keep things, you know, easy to follow and all that kind of stuff. So, for example, I want to start with this mid component. So I'm going to activate that guy, and you can see the other 2 are kind of ghosted out, and we're working on the mid component. In fact, let's go ahead and turn those 2 off so we only see that. And I want to shell this thing out. It's basically just a plastic ring. You can kind of see that. So I'm going to shell this guy out. So I'm going to pre-select that top face, right mouse click, and it shows me the commands that make sense. The shell command. I didn't have to hunt, is that a create command or is that a modify command? It's right at my fingertips basically. So I'm going to say shell, and I'll start to drag so I can kind of get a preview of what that's going to look like. Well, I also want it to go all the way through, so I'm going to select that bottom face also. So we selected the top face and the bottom face, and now you can see that we're creating this ring. And according to the drawing, it's 0.08 in thickness, and I'll say OK, and we can see there is the shell feature for the mid component. Okay, let's turn these guys back on. We can kind of see what that looks like. Now I want to start working on the base component. So I'll click on base. Again, notice the timeline. There's really nothing in here yet. Okay. So let me see if I can show this here real quick. Go back to the camera here. So you can kind of see this indentation that goes, hopefully you can see that goes all the way around. And that's what this ring, basically sits down on. Okay. We just created this ring, and now we're going to use that ring to help us remove some geometry here. So let's do that. Let me get this part back apart so I can show it. Come on. Okay. It snaps together pretty good. So what we're going to do is I want to make this base be taller than the mid part, and then we're going to subtract the mid part from the base. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the parts I don't need to see. So we don't need to see basket, and I could just click on this face right here. You can kind of see it's going to grab that top face, and I'm going to do the press pull command, and watch what happens when I do this. It's going to basically grow that face up. It's following the curvature of that face, and we're just kind of pulling that face up. And I want to make sure I go past where the ring is. I'm past up here, but I'm not down here. So I'm going to go far enough that we're kind of past that ring. And I'll say OK. And notice it captured that offset face into our timeline. Okay. Now I want it to match the top of this mid, so I'm going to come in here and use that split body command again. What's the body to split? That is the body. What's the splitting tool? Well, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see as I hover over that, it's going to highlight that. Or I could turn off the base, and I can now really easily see that face right there. Okay. Now you'll notice I get a warning. It says, hey, you're trying to cut something that's not visible. So I need to obviously turn the base back on, and we can see how it's going to split the base using the top curvy swoopy face of that middle part. So I'll say OK. And let's expand open our base component, and we can see that we have in the bodies, we have two separate bodies. So I don't need this body anymore. I'm going to say remove. Now, a question I get quite often is, what's the difference between delete and remove? I would recommend when you're working with components and stuff, try and remove as much as possible instead of delete. Remove basically says, I don't want this in my design. And notice it actually adds a remove feature into our timeline. If I had said delete, it's going to physically delete that, and that could cause potential downstream issues. So you're going to have much better luck if you use the remove command. Now this is a little bit confusing, so let's do this. Let's go to Inspect, Component Color Cycling, and that doesn't help too much, but you can see that we have, well, let me activate maybe the top level so you can kind of see. Yeah, it doesn't help too much. I was hoping you'd see the different colors there. So you can kind of see we have the base object, and then we also have this mid that's kind of overlapping that base right there. So my base is still active. That's my active component. I can come in here and do a combine. Now we're going to do a combine cut Okay, so what's the target body? What do I want to keep? Well, I want to keep this body here. And then what's the tool? What are we using to modify this? Well, the tool is going to be the mid part. Now you'll notice by default it said join, and so it assumes you want to join these together. But we want to actually cut them away. You can kind of see it sort of highlights what that's going to look like. But here's the important thing. I don't want to lose that ring that we've already created. I just want to use it as a tool. So I'm going to say keep tool. We'll say OK. And now you can see if I turn off this part that it used that part to kind of subtract away part of the plastic. Okay. If I turn this guy back on, let's go ahead and turn everything back on. You can kind of see how it looks like it just kind of fits right over that other part. Okay. So kind of a cool tip there with that keep tools. It allowed us to use it to subtract stuff away or to cut stuff away, but we still have that part. We haven't lost it. Okay. So now what we want to do is start building kind of the circular part that comes off the top right here. And to do that, I'm going to create an offset plane off the bottom of the part. I'm just going to start to drag up a little bit. And I can see that's going in the negative direction. And I need to go minus 3.5 in this case. Okay. And what we're doing here is we're basically drawing this round part up here. And you can see that it's 3.5 from the bottom of our part. And then what we're going to do is we're going to extrude to our part. So I'll click on this face or on this plane and say create a sketch. Okay. Then I can come in here and draw a circle. It's going to catch to the center automatically for me. And it needs to be 1.875. And we're done. I'll say finish sketch. Okay. I'll say extrude. So I pre-select my profile. I say extrude. I like to start having it go in the right direction. Now, if I kept going, you're going to see it turn into a cut because it's cutting into the part right here. So I could drag like so and change this to a join if I wanted to, but there's a really cool command in here. So I'm going to just start having it extrude, and instead of saying go to a particular distance, I can say to object, and I can click on that face, and it's going to extrude down to that face, and you'll notice it's matching the curvature and everything. So I didn't have to type in a distance. I didn't have to, like, you know, go into the model and all that kind of stuff. And you'll notice it's going to join it together, which is what we want. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and we're starting to get kind of the basic shape of the base. Okay. Okay. Looking at the bottom of the part, there's two little holes that kind of screw things together. So we're going to do those guys next. And I want them to be in a very particular location. So I'm going to spend some time to do some dimensions and that kind of a thing. Okay. So I'm going to create a sketch on this bottom face. And then I'm going to draw a line from the center. Okay. And then you'll notice it's asking for a length and an angle. Okay. So I'm going to type in the length. I know I need it to be 0.8 in length. And I'm going to jump over, hit the tab key to go to the other cell. And I want this to be at an angle of 130. Now you'll notice that those are locked. I can go to either side here or up and stuff like that, but we've locked the length and we've locked the angle. So I'll just go ahead and click, and we now have a line that's 0.8 in length at an angle of 130. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to place a hole at a particular location. In fact, I could come in here and maybe change that to a construction line and say finish sketch. So I now have an exact location here. I like to use the whole command right here. Okay, and the reason for that is it gives you a lot of options. Now, one of the things it asks for is, at a point or from a sketch, for example. So I'm going to say at a point, but you'll notice that what it basically allows me to do is to click somewhere, and it's going to put that circle where I clicked. Okay? Or if I came in here and said from a sketch, you'll notice I can now click on that particular point, and it's going to put it right at that location. I'm going to kind of rotate around so I can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, now I'm going to use some dimensions from the drawing. So the overall depth is going to be 0.3. My counterbore diameter, I'm going to make 0.24. My counterbore depth, and what I've done here is instead of, if I just do a simple hole, I can specify my diameter and my depth. In fact, let's go ahead and start there. It remembered what I typed in earlier. So 0.135 is the diameter, and 0.3 is the depth. And you'll notice all of these options. I can make it so it's got a drill point or a flat, which I'm going to do a flat in this case. And then I also want to do a counterbore. And so by clicking on counterbore, you can see how it changes this little preview right here and gives me some more options. And so I can specify the diameter of the counterbore, and the depth of the counterbore is 0.16. Okay, so I get a nice little preview of what that's going to look like. I'll go ahead and say OK. And we can see that it created a hole at that location. Now remember, this is a solid body. It's not hollow yet. We're going to get there. So you can kind of see, it just kind of drilled into here at a certain depth. Now I also want to do another counterbore because there's a little sticker pad that gets put over the screw hole. And so I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'll say hole. Okay. This time I'm going to click out here in space to kind of show you some stuff that you can do with this. Instead of the sketch, I'm going to just click out here. And then I'm going to change some of this stuff. So I'm going to leave the depth alone. I'm going to leave the diameter alone. But this time I'm going to change the diameter of the counterbore to 0.4. And you'll see a nice preview. And the depth is pretty shallow. It's only 0.025. Okay. Then I can grab this blue dot, and you'll notice as I'm dragging it around, it highlights the center of the circle just below where I'm at right now. And so I can just come over here and it's going to snap to that location. I'll say OK, and we now have another counterbore going into this hole. So this is where that sticker, that little pad, is going to go to cover up the screw holes. Okay, so neat little tip there. I want this on the other side, so I'm going to use the mirror command. In fact, let me show this. I kind of don't use the S key very often, and I should. You notice I went to the Create menu, and then I came down to Mirror. You can use the S key, so if I just hit S, it allows you to have these shortcuts, these commonly used shortcuts. And I can search for things, so I can start typing in mirror, for example, and there it is. And it's going to run that command. So instead of having to find it in the menu, you can just do the S key. You can also do the S key, and let's say you use the mirror command quite a bit. You can hover over this little icon right here, and it'll add it to your S key dialog. So now I'm not in it, I hit S, and there's that mirror command. So another cool little tip is that you can search for them and you can add them to the S key. So notice it has different different types for the pattern. So faces, bodies, features, and components. I could say faces, but that's quite a few faces I'd have to manually select and make sure I'd have to zoom up and grab this little guy and all that kind of stuff. Okay, I don't want to mirror the body, I don't want to mirror the component, so I'm going to say I want to mirror a feature. And again, notice the object has an S at the end, so I can select more than one. So I want to mirror that whole feature and that whole feature. Because remember, I did the standard counter bore and then I did a second counter bore, so I want to mirror both of those at the same time. So I'm going to select both of those. What's my mirror plane? I'll go ahead and grab my YZ plane. You can kind of see a little preview that comes up. And then I will go ahead and say OK. And we've just mirrored that to the other side. So instead of having to recreate a sketch and dimensions and all that kind of stuff, we just used the mirror command. And you can see all of my features are underneath my base component. If I were to activate my mid component, you only see the shell feature. If I activate my basket component, you don't see anything. If I activate my base component, you can see the steps that we've been doing so far on this part. Okay, so I now have pretty much what I want this thing to look like. It's still one body, but I want to hollow it out. Okay, so I'm going to use the shell command actually quite often in this design. So I'm going to right mouse click on my top face there and say shell. And then I'll start to drag, and you'll see it gives me a preview of what that's going to look like. Now notice inside, because we've created these holes in these counter bores, it's actually going to shell around that for me. However, I want the screw to be able to come up through this face right here. So I'm actually going to also select the bottom face of the screw. Okay, so I'm going to control select that guy, control select that guy, and now you can see, let me look at it from the top. We're looking through the top and we're kind of looking through the bottom. So it kind of opened up those areas, and now a screw will be able to go down through in there. Okay. Now the thickness, I think I want it to be, according to the drawing, is 0.08. Again, you can kind of see what that looks like. Okay. And I'll say OK. You can see through the part. Pretty cool. Okay. So what I want to do now is start working on more of the inside of the part. So I'm going to create another sketch. This time I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it on this front plane again. And I've mentioned this in other live streams. It's like some people say, well, can't you reuse the same sketch? And you could, but it's also, you can have multiple sketches, and I like to have multiple sketches. Yes, it adds more stuff to my timeline, but it allows me to go back and make easier changes instead of, figuring out which sketch is what and, making a complex sketch. I'd rather have 2 or 3 easier sketches than one complex sketch. And what we're going to be doing now is, let me switch to my camera. So we're working on this part here, and you'll actually notice that the bottom of this whole thing is connected to half of this part. And so what we're doing now is we're going to start splitting this part, and we want to keep this bottom. And this will make more sense as we get a little bit further along. So I'm going to create a sketch, which I just did, and then I want to project. So P for project. And I want to project some information from the inside. Now remember, Fusion remembers my last setting. The last thing I did was bodies. So if I hover over this, it's going to basically silhouette the whole thing. Well, I want to capture this inside face. So I'm going to click on specified entities and click on that inside face. And let me rotate so you can kind of see what it did here. So it just projected that inside face right there. I'll go ahead and say OK. Let's turn off the body real quick, and sure enough, you can see that line. Okay. So all it did was project that inside face. And what this is going to allow us to do is use that line. So now you can see I can catch to it. and I'm just going to draw a rectangle like so. Okay, like I said, this will make more sense the further along we go, but what we're going to do is we're going to use this rectangle to split this body, and it's basically going to keep the floor. If I had said just split the body in half, it would have split the floor in half, and I would have had to spend a lot of time kind of piecing things back together. But by doing this, you'll see here in just a second, I can now use this to split the body. Okay, so notice we have one part. I'll come in here and say split body. That's the body. What's the splitting tool? I'm going to pick on this rectangle. Okay. Now, when I say okay, you'll notice I got a bunch of parts. And there's some pros and cons with this. And you can see as I hover over them, it actually like split off some of the standoffs and all this kind of stuff. Okay. But I now have this base as like a separate body. Okay, and that's kind of key. Now what I'm going to do is, and this is still all one body, this base right here, you can kind of see that's all one body right here. I want to split that guy in half. So I'm going to come in here and say split body. That's the body I want to split. What's my splitting tool? Well, this time I'm going to use this plane right here because I know that everything's centered. So I'm going to pick that XZ plane, and you're going to see that it's going to split the body this way. Now it is not going to split this bottom one because I only told it to split this large one right here. And watch what happens. We get even more bodies over here. But I now have something that looks like this. Okay, or like that, because this was split off earlier using the rectangle. It's its own separate body. And then I can come back and combine these guys back together. So I'll say combine. What's the target? I'll say that's the target. What's the tool? I'll go ahead and select that guy there and that guy there. I don't want to cut. I want to join them back to this bottom part. Now, Fusion remembered my last settings. Keep tools. Do I want to keep the tools in this case? And the answer is no, because I just want them to join. I don't need to use them again somewhere else. I just want them to be glued onto this part. So watch what happens when I say OK. You'll see the number of parts becomes smaller. So now we have that part there, we have that part there, and then we have this other part that's hidden right now or turned off right there. Okay? So what I want to do in here is combine these two together. So I'll come in here and say combine that part and that part. We'll join them together. I don't need to keep the tools. I'll say OK. And now we are left with a single part with that base and the little screw holes. And we're left with the other half, which we're going to get to on the next live stream. And in fact, I might even rename this. I might call this base with floor. And then I could just call this guy base or without floor or something like that. But at least I know what they are. Okay. Hopefully that made sense. Okay. Taking a look at this, I don't know if my camera is going to be good enough. It is hard to see, but there, I can't figure out where to point. There's like this little tiny lip that goes all the way around the part that connects the two parts together. And yeah, I don't think it's going to focus very well. You can kind of see a little bit better there. So there's a little lip that extends out and it slides the parts together or connects the parts together. And so we want to do that. Right now, we just split it straight in half and it's just a flat face. Okay. So I need to add some material to create that lip. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what's the best way of doing this. And I actually came up with like 3 or 4 different ways. I mean, I could, you know, project this face and then offset it, but that required a lot of trimming and all that kind of stuff. What I ended up doing is actually using the shell command, which I think is quite humorous in this case, because you'd be like, I would never have thought of that. But watch what you can do with this. I need to give me some material here, so I'm going to come in and revolve. So I'm going to say create revolve. I'm going to revolve that face, okay? What's the axis? I'll go ahead, maybe I could click like this middle axis here. And then it's asking, you know, it's doing 360, but let's just do something small like 5 degrees. And so you can kind of see what's happening here, okay? So you can kind of see it's revolving that profile about 5-10 degrees. And so it's continuing the direction, which is kind of the key thing here. One of the things I kept running into is if I just extruded straight out, this wasn't a true circle anymore. And so I spent a lot of time making sure that we're still at a true circle. So I'm going to say, let's go 2 degrees in this case. But the key thing is I do not want to join. I want to create a new body. I'll say OK. And you'll see that sure enough, it took that profile and it revolved it 2 degrees. It's continuing around that arc there. In fact, let's do the same thing over here. I'll repeat my last command. We'll click on that guy there. Specify the same axis, 2 degrees. And we'll say new body. Okay. So I've got those guys there. Now, I want to basically split this thing in half and leave just a portion that's kind of sticking out. So check this out. I'm going to say shell. And I'm going to grab a couple faces. So I'm going to grab that face there. And let's just do a small thickness here. Let's go 0.04. If it's going to let me do that. Let me do, yeah, there we go. I'm just going to do something pretty small, 0.02. Let's start with that. So you can see by selecting that face there, it's going to shell out that region. Well, I can add multiple faces. So I'm going to add that face. I'm going to add that face. And then check this out. I'm going to add this face here. And you can see it's kind of weird, but it left a little sliver, right? Okay, because we're shelling this thing out. And again, if I kind of change the thickness here, you kind of see what's happening. Okay, I'm going to go something like that. So we're basically removing a bunch of geometry by selecting all of those faces. It's going to shell that out. And in fact, in this thickness, I want it to be 0.04. So I can keep adding faces. I'm going to add that face there, and you can see it's basically creating this little lip. So I'll go ahead and add that face, and then let me turn off this to get this bottom face here. I'll add that face. Now, could I have done the exact same thing with the offset command? Absolutely. In a sketch, right? But to me, I thought this was almost faster, less trimming. Because it's a feature, I could come in and change its thicknesses if I needed to. You know, if I changed the angle of this guy, this would update accordingly. So I just found that I thought this was kind of a cool solution to quickly create, you know, a lip for this thing. So let's do the exact same thing here. I'll say shell, grab these top 4 faces to kind of start things off, and then type in the 0.04, and then I just add in these other faces. Let me control select that guy, that guy, and then the bottom face. Okay. We'll turn the base back on, and we can see that we now have, and I could have actually probably mirrored this one over to the other side since it's symmetric. I totally could have done that. But I kind of wanted to show this process, and you play around with it. If, you know, again, I put my outline in the description of the video. So if you want to try this out, feel free to do that. I also included the drawings to create this model. Okay, so now I need to combine. Now here's a tip. My target body, this is the body I want to keep. And you'll notice it says base with floor. If I selected this guy as my target body and then joined this as the tool, watch what happens. Base with floor goes away and body 7 is now the whole thing, okay? So when you're doing the combine, the target is what you want to keep. So I want to keep the base with floor. The tool is going to be that guy and that guy. And you can see the preview is already joining them together. Pretty cool. We don't need to keep the tools, so watch what happens when I say OK. We're left with basically the two halves, right? Okay. Okay. In fact, let's turn on this other half, and now you can see that it's basically overlapping this one. But we can use this geometry to help us make this geometry. In fact, let's do that. We'll say combine. So what is the target? Well, the target is what I want to keep or what I'm changing, so it's going to be that guy. What's the tool? The tool is going to be that guy. Okay. Now we don't want to join them together. We want to cut them apart, but I definitely want to keep that as my tool. So I'm going to say keep tools and watch that stays the same. There's my base with the floor. You can see the floor there. And then here's the other part, and notice it got etched. Now, you'll also notice there's these little tiny sliver faces. I mean, they're like microscopically thin. And I don't know if that's just because of this is on a curve or something like that, but sometimes you'll run into this. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, do I make that shelled part even bigger, but then it, you know, affected this. So I think just the fastest thing to do is just to select those two faces. Actually, there's 4 on each side, and then just hit the delete key on your keyboard. And Fusion has to heal that geometry. So when I hit delete, you'll see that it actually removed those little extra faces, and everything looks good now. And if we turn this guy back on, they fit perfectly together. Okay, pretty cool way to make this interlocking latch or whatever, I think. Okay, getting close to running out of time here, and I actually have quite a few things left. Let me show you what we have left here. Let me turn these guys off, expand this guy open. So we have this little shelf right here, and then we have these little parts that kind of stick out. So I'm going to go ahead and do the shelf, but we'll save this for the next session, because unfortunately I have a call right at the top of the hour. So we'll do that, and then on the next session. So let me just go ahead and do that shelf. So what I'm going to do here is create an offset plane from the bottom, drag up, and again, according to the drawing, this is 1.85. Okay. And then this is pretty cool. Check this out. I'm going to create a sketch. It's happy that we're working on it, it looks like. I'm going to create a sketch. And so there's a piece of paper basically slicing through this model. Well, under the project command, there's one called intersect. Okay. And what this allows you to do is it's going to, again, I can do the whole body, or I can do a specified entity. I'm just going to click on this inside curved face, and where this plane intersects that body, or that, I'm sorry, where this plane intersects the other body, it's going to create a sketch line right there. So let me turn that guy off, and you can see it created that sketch line. Because typically with project, you would say like project this top face and it would bring it down onto that plane. Intersect is just basically like what it says. It's going to draw a projection line where it slices through or intersects the body. Then I can use this to help me. I'm going to offset this line. Let's just go 0.1 in this case. Okay. So it's going to grab the exact same shape that's inside here. We've offset that. And then I'm just going to close this off just with the line command. I'll just go ahead and draw to those points. You can see how that kind of shaded in. And then I'll go ahead and extrude this. Now with the extrude command, it wants to go in one direction, typically. But I can come in here and say, I want it to be symmetric, okay? I also don't want it to cut, I want to join. And when you do symmetric, you get the option of doing half length or whole length. So half length, it's basically saying it's going 0.116 up and 0.116 down. But by doing whole length, the whole thing is 0.116 right now. And I want it to be 0.05 according to the drawing. And we're going to join that together. So you can see it's all part of the base. And then let's fillet this corner here. Now some people like to add the fillets at the very end, and that's totally fine. I like to add the fillets as I'm going along so I don't forget to add them. So I kind of break things down into individual areas, like this area here. I'm working on this little shelf right here, so I might as well do everything it has to do with that shelf and keep it all together in my timeline. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save. And I can give a description here, so I can say, you know, created half the model or something like that. And it's going to go from version 1 to version 2. Okay, like I mentioned, next week we'll work on these little, it's kind of hard to see, those little indentations there, and they actually stick out of the model just a little bit. So you can kind of see they come out a little bit. And then this little port right here in the middle kind of holds the power port. And then we'll start working on the other side of the plastic model. There's some, and it's again really kind of hard to see, but there's also some standoffs in there and that kind of stuff. So hopefully you all will find this project interesting. Like I mentioned before, feel free to download the outline and the drawings and give it a try yourself. And hope to see you on a future live stream. Thank you.